Good morning and welcome back to another of our NASCAR DFS breakdowns. I promise you by next time I do one of these videos, we will have a proper introduction so it doesn't look as basic as it does here. But nonetheless, I guess irrelevant what our graphics and intro look like, we're here to talk the AAA 400 Drive for Autism. Really sets up to be an interesting race. Typically over the past few weeks, we have seen a situation where we've got a lot of leaders starting at the back. When I say leaders, high price players. Let's just say high price players, guys on the points list trying to get into the Cup Series playoffs. They've been scattered all over the place. Really, this is a pretty solid division, like right in half, basically. It's basically the top 20 are in the top 20, the bottom 20 are in the bottom 20. We have some variance there. Really, the only variances are actually Logano and Boyer starting below 20, and Daniel Suarez and Trevor Bayne starting above 20. So it's going to be interesting. Don't really know. 400 laps is enough laps that I think you absolutely have to be looking at the drivers who could lead laps in this race, because passing isn't necessarily going to be as severe. There are a couple guys that stick out as being pretty decent place differential plays. You'll want to have some exposure to them. But overall, I wouldn't go absolutely crazy with that. I would just really try to see what I could do to focus on laps led. Let's just talk about a few, maybe even just talk about the field. This is one of those things where saying, like, here's a few picks, it doesn't necessarily justify how things could, break out. First and foremost, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex starting 1-2. Both of these guys are showing a ton of speed. Busch finished 1-3 in the last two practices in terms of total speed. Truex 3-4. So you've got guys that are showing a tremendous amount of speed up top. These guys battled it out last week only to be outsmarted, out-game planned by Austin Dillon and his team in the Coca-Cola 600. So I think this could be a situation where you see another battle with them again. Daniel Suarez starting at third, 15th in the first practice, 8th in the second. I love Daniel Suarez. I mentioned it last week for the Coca-Cola 600. This guy is close to getting his first win. Has the seal kind of been broken? Larson got his first victory earlier this year. Austin Dillon got his first victory last week. Can we see someone like Suarez perhaps surprise a lot of people? I mean, this is now 2 weeks in a row that I believe he's been sitting either at top 10 qualifying or at the very least top 10 speed in practice. So because of his salary, if he was able to maintain this third position by the end of the race, he's going to be a great point per dollar play. Will he be able to do that when you've got some other guys running fast behind him? I don't know. So that brings us to Matt Kenseth. Practice 1, 14, practice 2, 5th. Definitely someone on the radar. Kyle Larson showing a ton of speed, leading in the final practice. He's always someone, and it was very exciting actually last year between he and Kenseth, as well as Chase Elliott down the stretch. So I don't hate that. Kurt Busch is always going to be someone I have ownership of. He's been running better and better since a couple of weeks after winning the Daytona 500. He's someone I'll have exposure to. Eric Jones just scares the hell out of me. Two drivers that scare the hell out of me week in and week out. Eric Jones and Ryan Blaney, because they're so wild. They show their youth, I think, much more than a guy like Daniel Suarez does. They might have had more overall success in terms of their placing in races, but they're undisciplined a little bit. We see Blaney, Jones, these guys get loose week in and week out. I'm not saying not to play Blaney or Jones. I'm just saying I feel like it's a little more risky. Can't ever rule Brad Keselowski out. I understand the practice numbers don't look good, but he's one of the better drivers in the Cup Series. Don't hate him. Austin Dillon. I'm actually going to pull back a little bit of exposure to Austin Dillon this week. Have typically played him pretty heavily because he tends to qualify middle of the pack and, top 15, maybe even top 10 upside. Obviously wins last week has always worked out. I could see a lot of people jumping in on that this week. Price still pretty low, but I think I'll bow out. Danny Hamlin, another guy, he doesn't like his car this week. Practice, from where he qualified to where he finished in practice, just didn't look good enough for me. Earnhardt Jr., very small ownership position on him. I just don't like Dale, period. Ricky Stenhouse, fair enough play. Don't know how much upside there is, but he could be a pretty solid cash game play, starting 12th. Finishing, averaging around that speed in the last two practices. Ryan Newman, solid but unspectacular. I'll probably not have a ton of ownership there. Beyond that, we're looking at, I don't know why I can't find who's the, anyway, whatever. Oh, Jimmy Johnson, showing a ton of speed. Great history here. Not in recent time, though, so be prepared for Johnson to be overweight by the by players because of his history here. Though I don't know, players are getting sharper and sharper, so everyone might be thinking, you know what, Johnson had been great here, has not had recent success here. Starting 14th, everyone's going to have him for the place differential plus potential to win, showing a ton of speed in practice. I'm going to have exposure. We're less than 2 hours out from this race. I cannot tell you what kind of exposure I'm going to end up having to Jimmy Johnson. I'm very torn on what to do with him. It is going to be a tough push for me this week with him. Back to Blaney. A little bit of exposure because I think the kid, he's going to end up surprising someone and winning a race sooner rather than later, so I don't hate that. Chase Elliott, horse for the course, I think. So I don't hate that either. This is what I'm saying. Like, it gets really difficult. Trevor Bayne, I'm off Trevor Bayne. Y'all can have him. I'm good on that. Kevin Harvick at 18th. Showing enough speed to be a top 10 car. That's 10 place differential points. You can never rule him out. He has not won this year. We know that's probably not going to last. Has good success here. I think the pivot for me would be from Johnson and Busch to Harvick. So I think that's a pretty solid play. Jamie McMurray showing top 10 speed, starting 19th. Wouldn't hesitate to rock him. Casey Kane, great success here, especially recently. I'll have some exposure just because I'll buy into the narrative of his past here and hoping that he can get a top 10 for the third straight time at this track. Beyond these guys, I think Clint Boyer's going to be a popular pick. He seemed to get things fixed by the time the practice runs ended. Joey Logano starting 26th, having some success here as well. I think that'll pique a lot of people's interest. Things just haven't looked good for Logano the past couple of weeks. His car just doesn't seem to get squared away. 10th and 19th in final practice. I mean, at his price, if he's able to gain 10 positions and finish 15th, I mean, it's not the worst, but I just think you're going to get a better return out of a guy like Matt Kenseth, who could potentially lead laps in this race starting at 4th. I'd rather go there. That doesn't mean that Logano isn't a good pivot in tournaments. Looking at some of the cheaper plays, standing out to me, Chris Buescher. Again, this is a guy who his trajectory is going the right way, starting at 29th. With the accidents that are bound to happen here, as long as he's able to avoid that, I could see a top 15 finish for him in this race, starting at 29th. 15 place differential points and where he'd finish at this price could end up being very good. Allmendinger just starting a little high for my liking. Danica's someone I mentioned in the article. She's not showing a ton of speed yet, but starting 31st, I'm going to be an idiot this week and give her the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if she'll crack my cash game lineup, though. She's been running well this year and has dealt with a ton of bad luck. She really has. David Reagan, someone that jumps out at me starting 33rd. I think the reason he jumps out at me is just because he's actually posted like 30-point totals a lot this season. And with the field being so top-heavy in terms of how the finishes could go in terms of laps led, really even in terms of place differential, when you've got Logano and Boyer and McMurray as guys who could be top place differential points, a guy like Reagan who can go from 33rd to 23rd, who's got the history of being a solid driver behind him, I really don't hate it. But there's a lot of guys. Basically, Michael McDowell feels like he's starting too high. Landon Castle feels like he's starting too high. DiBenedetto feels like he's starting too high. And guys like Earnhardt, Gaulding, Chastain, Ware, Sieg, all starting near the back, but I just can't. There's nothing that really motivates me into wanting to play them any more than that. I think Reagan, the Toyotas have been showing a lot of speed. Being a part of Front Row Motorsports, I think could benefit him this week. I'm not thinking we're going to see him as a top 15 driver, but we've seen even last fall or last spring at this race, we saw like a 16-car pileup that took 10 cars out of the race. So the potential for him to finish top 20 is not unheard of. It's going to be tough, but I just think he's one of the better value plays at his price. Don't hate him. I think my main strategy in terms of a lot of my tournament lineups are going to be to pair Buescher and Reagan together and just take a lot of those guys starting probably 1 through 6 and then 12 through 18 and just pairing those together, hoping that we could get a good combination of laps led, which translates a lot to fastest laps, as well as some point and differential guys that could end up winning the race in that second tier range. That'll wrap it up. Hope you have good success today. This should be a fun race. We shouldn't be looking at the marathon that we had last week with the Coca-Cola 600. Hope everyone does well. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Check us out at Research Fantasy. Let us know what you think about the videos. Like I said, I'll do a better job next time in terms of production quality. We'll work towards that in all our videos moving forward. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. We'll see you again next week.